Hello everyone, Professor Toybox here, along with Thor, and I'm back in my Asgard toy box where we've been talking about storytelling and how to tell stories in Disney Infinity with the limited text options available to us. Last time we did an overview of visual storytelling, which is telling a story without words, and we talked about some of the general principles of that and looked at some of the creativitoys that are available in Disney Infinity that can help us do that. And today I want to build a solid example of how we can tell a story with the limited options available to us. And this will answer the request that I got from Zmail Farmer on Reddit, how to use the Creativitoys to lead a player through a toy box game. And so what I have in mind here is we're going to set up a mission giver in this little area here near the start of the level. And that mission giver is going to direct us down that way towards the palace. And we'll be going down into the treasure room and defending Odin's treasures against some Imperial stormtroopers. As I mentioned last time, we're going to use the Empire as our enemies in here. And I set that Star Destroyer up there, which is an immediate visual indicator to the player as they come into this toy box that Thor and Star Wars exist in the same little universe here that I'm building. So we'll go ahead and start first with the mission giver. And we're going to come into the cast members drawer. And we have Sif here. And she's a friend of Thor and lives on Asgard, so it made perfect sense to use her as our mission giver. I'm going to put her in this little corner over here. And now I have to be quick about this because as soon as I put her down, I want to get into the properties and set her to stand still before she starts wandering away. Oh good, she didn't wander too far. There we go. You have no idea how long it took, how many takes it took to do that. She kept wanting to wander into places I didn't want her to go, like over here, which causes the camera to zoom out and makes it a lot harder to select her. Okay, so we have our mission giver, and right now we can walk up to her and nothing happens. So we need a few Creativitoys to get the mission underway. So we'll come over to the Creativitoys drawer, and I'm going to need three things out of here for this step. We're going to need the radar marker, and for right now I'll put that here. I'm also going to need the text displayer. We do have a few limited text options available to us, so we should use those when we can. And I need a dynamic trigger. And we'll go ahead and hook all of these up. So we'll come over to the radar marker first. And we'll come under properties and the beacon type. I've noticed in the playsets that blue tends to be for side quests and yellow for the main quest. So we're going to use the yellow exclamation point. And I don't want the beacon to show up over this radar marker. I want it to show up over Sif. So we'll go to the connected actor, which I'll connect up in a moment. And we're going to make this active right away when we come in the toy box. And now we'll go ahead and connect this to our actor, which is Sif. There we go. So now she's got the little indicator over her head. So far so good. But if we walk up to her, still nothing's going to happen. So now we need to hook up this dynamic trigger. And for this, we're going to connect this to her as well. And the dynamic trigger is going to set up a radius around her that we can trigger when we walk into that. So under the properties, the target, again, is not this Creativitoy. It's going to be Sif, so our connected actor. And the trigger distance, it's kind of weird here. This isn't in blocks or anything meaningful you would expect. This is in a different kind of unit, and there are 4 of these units for every block. So we're going to go ahead and set this to 4, which would make 1 block radius around her. And if we want to make it a little bit more forgiving, we could set this to 6, so we don't have to be right in her face in order to trigger the mission. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And now when we do enter that radius around her, we'll set up this logic connection. When entered by player, any, we'll come over to our text displayer, and we're going to use the text down in the missions drawer, and she's going to say, I need your help. And I will go ahead and set the properties for the text displayer. So the text duration can be a little bit longer. The text style, we're going to make this a proposal, so we can accept or reject it. And for the player, all players can accept or reject this proposal. So anybody, player 1 or 2. So that's fine. So now we have our mission giver. And this part of the tutorial's done, and we can go ahead and test this little part of it. So there's Sif. We can walk up to her, and she says, I need your help. So we can say continue or cancel. Right now I'm going to say cancel because if we say continue, nothing will happen. So for that, we need to move on to the next step. So there's our mission giver. And those 3 controls go with her. So now we're going to set up the next waypoint along our path here. And for that, we are going to need another radar marker. And for right now, I'm going to drop this right here. This is eventually going to go down into the palace, but if I put that all the way down there, it's going to be difficult to make these connections because we're going to have to go all the way back and forth to do that. So I'm going to put down the radar marker and a locator. And we'll come into this radar marker and connect that to the locator. This locator is where I want the beacon to show up. And we'll look under the properties for the radar marker. And for the beacon type, again, the yellow is the main quest, and we're going to use the yellow arrow, which tells the player I want to go to this point. The beacon location this time is going to be the locator. I am not going to set this active yet because I don't want to do that until we accept Sif's mission. So there's the next waypoint in our little mission journey. So now we'll come back over here to the text displayer, a new logic connection when the text proposal is accepted. So we walk up to Sif, she says I need your help, and we say press the A button for agree. We go ahead and accept that proposal. We'll come over to this radar marker and activate it. And that'll show us where we need to go next. And at the same time, on that proposal accepted, we'll turn off the beacon that's over Sif's head because that's no longer needed. And we can go ahead and save a little bit of CPU if we turn off this dynamic trigger. There's no need to check the radius around her when nothing is going to happen. So there's no point in wasting processing cycles making that check. So there we go. We have our mission giver. We have our first waypoint here. So now I'm going to go ahead and move this waypoint down to the palace. And as you can see, that was a lot easier to set up there than if we had to go all the way down here to make each of these connections. And our first waypoint, I'm going to put over here on the throne dais, right in front of the door. This is where I want the player to go. And by placing this here, I think it'll be pretty clear to the player that they're meant to go down these stairs. And I don't want to put this right up to the door or inside it because then the arrow will be hidden inside of here, so I want it to be visible. So we'll put this out a little bit of ways from that doorway. And I'm going to go ahead and move the radar marker that it goes with down there as well. Eventually I'm going to have a number of mission givers in here. And if I don't keep these controls together, it'll be hard to figure out what goes with what later on. So we're going to go ahead and put this down here as well. I kind of like to keep things organized a little bit. It just makes it easier later on if I have to make changes or if there's a bug I need to fix to find the controls I need to change. So that locator's right there. I'm going to go ahead and drop this down underneath back here where it's a little bit hidden. There we go. And now we have our waypoint there. So the next step here, I want to go ahead and put down another dynamic trigger, because when the player reaches this point, we want to turn that arrow off and show them where they got to go next. So I'm going to go ahead and attach this to that same locator. There we go. And the properties will be set up the exact same way. So we'll come over here. Properties. The target is going to be the locator. Target distance, we'll make this 6 again. So you get fairly close. And when you come within that radius, new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll go ahead and turn off that radar marker. So we've got our mission giver, and we've directed the player to this point now. And I think it's fairly clear to the player at this point when they get here that they're meant to go down these stairs. So I don't know that we necessarily need another waypoint. I might be wrong about that, but we'll try it without. So now we go down the stairs and we'll enter Odin's treasure vault. And at this point we're going to be fighting some enemies and defending these treasures. So I'm going to go ahead and drop down a couple of enemy generators in here. This will be the end of our short little mission. And we'll need some locators to connect those two. And I want to make sure that little blue dot's facing the right way. It's not. It's facing to the right. I want it facing that way. That's better, because I want them to face the player as the player comes in here. So we'll put down a few of these. And I'm going to put a couple of them up here at the top of the stairs. About right there and right there. Alright, so let's connect the first enemy wave generator. So we'll come down here, and this will be for those 2 points at the top of the stairs. So I'm going to connect that to both of these locators. This will be where the enemies from this wave generator spawn. And this can be a little bit difficult to follow. Unfortunately, you don't have control of the camera. When you're doing this, it automatically spins it around in some strange directions. So you're kind of at the mercy of what it does here. Okay, so now we got our locators. We'll configure the wave. And for this, we're going to put in just some basic stormtroopers. A mix of them maybe, and an officer. And I find it's typically good, at least on the Wii U, to limit the wave generator to 5 enemies per wave generator. If I put down too many with a single wave generator, it tends to bog down the game and I get some lag. So for me, that works out pretty well. You might fare a little better on other consoles with more memory. I don't know. So we'll go ahead and put these at a random locator. And I'm going to take the generation delay to 0. And we don't really need the generation effects, so we'll hide that. And now this is very important. The team. Normally, the team for enemies is none, and that's usually fine. In this case, though, we have those Odin's treasure canisters, 6 of them set up in the vault here. And as soon as you drop any enemy in this toy box, they're going to immediately run to those canisters and start attacking them. And I don't want them to do that. I want them to attack the player in this case. There's really no point in having them attack those canisters. So the way to do that is you put the canisters and the enemies on the same team. And I chose the blue team. On the white stormtroopers, that's not as noticeable as like purple or green. So that makes things better. So there we go. The first wave generator is done. And you have to remember to come over to these canisters. And for each of these, you want to come into the properties and set the team to be the blue team like we just did on that wave generator. And I've already done that ahead of time for all of these canisters. I think when the player comes down here, I'd rather have the enemies attack the player. If I don't set that team, as soon as the enemies come in here, they'll run over here and start attacking these, and they'll be oblivious to the player. And you'll be able to run up behind them and just start whacking at them, and they won't care what you're doing. It'll make the battle much too easy. So that's why I want to do this. So now we'll come in and hook up the second wave generator. And I'm going to connect that to these other locators here. Let's see. Got to get over top of that thing. There we go. And one more. Okay, so for this wave generator, go ahead and configure the wave. And I'd like to put in some stronger enemies here. So the ones at the door will be kind of the weaker cannon fodder while these guys have time to spawn in and get ready to attack. So we're going to use a couple of these first order shielded elite guys and some heavy arms guys and maybe another officer. Not that he poses a great threat, but you can expect a number of heavily armed stormtroopers and a couple of officers to be the ones to penetrate the treasure vault. We'll set that to be a random locator, no generation delay. We'll hide the effects since the player is not going to see them. And very important, set the team. There we go. So that's the treasure vault and the enemies in there. So now we need a way to generate these. And there's a couple of different ways I could do this. I could hook up that dynamic trigger to do it, but I think I would rather, as soon as the player commits and starts down those stairs, is when I'd rather do the generation. So I'm going to put a trigger area inside this little doorway. And I don't need it extending all the way out here. There we go. So now, new logic connection when entered by player, Annie. We're going to come down to these wave generators and generate the wave. There we go. It's kind of hard to see with all that scenery in the way, but all right, we'll do the same for the other wave generator as well. And one more thing for that trigger area. I don't want this to happen every time we come through that trigger area. So we only want to do this one time. So for that, I'm going to need a logic gate. And I've shown you this little trick in some other videos, but we'll do it again here just because I need it, and it's always handy to know. And I don't necessarily assume that you've seen my other videos. So I want to come in and deactivate this trigger area after you come through it the first time so that it doesn't do this with the enemy wave generators every time you walk through here. So when entered by player any, and you'll note I can't turn around and come back and invoke this to deactivate it, which is why we need the logic gate. So we'll come over to the logic gate and input there. And then on output, from the logic gate, we can come back over to the trigger area. There we go. And deactivate it. So now we'll only generate the enemies in the vault when we walk through this the very first time. So if another player follows behind us, or we get down to the vault and then come back out, we don't want the enemies to continue generating. And a trigger area works here because this is the only way in or out of that vault. So a player has to pass through this trigger area. So that works out really well. Again, I could have used the dynamic trigger that's attached to this locator. But if the player is pursuing an enemy or some other thing like that, I don't want to necessarily generate the enemies down below. I kind of want to wait till they commit and go through that doorway. Alright, so we have our mission giver out at the start. We've got our first waypoint, and when they enter here, we've got the vault set up with the enemies. One last thing I'd like to do for this mission is once all these enemies are defeated, it would be nice to let the player know that they've accomplished the mission. So we're going to put down 2 toys for this. I want to use a text displayer. And I'm also going to use a sound effect. So we need a sound generator. Something visual and something audible. So, before we do that, actually, there's one more thing we got to have. And that is because I've got 2 wave generators here, I want to wait till both of them are finished. And so for that, we're going to need one more toy here, a dual action trigger. And if you look at the picture for that, you see 2 arrows going into the toy and 1 arrow coming out. So this toy will only trigger when it receives both inputs. So we'll put that down. And so we'll come over here to the first wave generator. And when the wave is defeated, we'll come to the dual action trigger and say input 1. And on the other one, when the wave is defeated, that will be input 2. And once both inputs are received on the dual action trigger, it'll fire the complete signal. And we can connect that up to whatever toys we want. In this case, our text displayer and sound generator. And this time we're going to come down to this victory drawer. And there's a lot of different things we could say. I think I'll use that one to let them know they reached their objective. And likewise, on the completed signal, we'll come over here to the sound generator. And there's some little musical flourishes. We'll do this little fanfare sound. On the sound generator, since I'm going to move this below the train here in a second, I want to come into Properties and turn off the 3D sound at speaker. And this way, you'll be able to hear this no matter where you are in the level. So it doesn't matter how far I am away from this, I'll be able to hear it. And on the text displayer, we want to set the properties for that. We'll increase the duration a little bit. I'm going to set the text style to banner, which will put it in nice big letters across the middle of the screen. You won't be able to miss it. And there we go. That's our mission. Got the mission giver, the waypoint up top, the battle in here, and when the battle's finished, we'll have it say victory and play a little sound. So I'm going to go ahead and move these below the terrain now to get them out of the way. As a player, you don't typically see these things in playsets and so forth. and having them in the way can cause some problems. Enemies will try to run around them, especially that speaker. If I'm in spark mode, I could accidentally delete these, and you don't know how many times I've accidentally done that when I'm playtesting something and decide to make a quick edit. There we go. So all of those are out of the way. And there's our adventure. So at this point, the mission is done. One more thing I'd like to do, though, today, and I know this is going to be a little bit longer video, but right now, we go to the mission giver and trigger that. We've got a long, empty area to run through until we get down to that treasure vault with nothing in between. And so I'd like to show you how to set up an encounter that can happen along the way. So we'll start here in this little courtyard. I'm going to set it up one time here, and then I'll go offline and set up a couple more exactly like this. So I'll only need to show this once. So I'm going to use an enemy wave generator, and I'm going to use another dynamic trigger, and some locators. And my idea here is that when the players enter this courtyard area, I'd like to have some enemies show up and kind of offer a little bit of resistance. So we're going to drop this here, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that points the right way. It's not really needed for the dynamic trigger, which is what I'm going to connect to that, but I might also use it for enemy generation. And now I'm going to put some locators down around some of these barriers where some enemies might be hiding behind them. Maybe they'll try to flank you from up here in these little colonnades. So we'll put a couple of them up here on this side. And a couple more over here on this side. And I know that flickering's annoying. When you cover up areas with ceilings, sometimes, like I am with those blocks, it can get a little bit weird. There's not really much I can do about that. It's a bug, I guess, in Disney Infinity. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Some kind of clipping problem that we can't fix. Alright, so we'll connect our dynamic trigger to that locator. And now when we come into properties, we're going to set the target to be that locator. And as far as distance goes, that's a good question. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's 4 units to every block. So if we come up here, we can kind of measure out what we need here. So if we put the block at that trigger, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, so at least 13 blocks, 14 or 15 maybe if I want to bring it out to here just before they come to that bridge. So if it's 4 units per block and we're talking 15 blocks, that would be a distance of 60 on this. So I'm going to set this trigger distance to be 60. And we'll try that first. And now when you enter this radius, we want to go ahead and generate the wave and put some enemies in here. And we want the enemies to show up at these locators. So we'll go ahead and put these in. And my thinking is I'm going to set this so they show up at a random location. It's a nice, quick, little simple way to get a little bit of unpredictability in here. And as you might remember from my Random Dungeon series, I really like unpredictability as a player of my own toy box, because I know what to expect, I know where I have to go. And it makes it a little fun for me to play this, because I don't know what to expect every time. When I set this up later, after this series is done, I'm probably going to come in here and do some of the things I did with my Random Dungeon series. And that is, I'll connect this dynamic trigger up to a randomizer, and the randomizer to several different enemy generators with several different waves of enemies, but I don't want to do that here today. I showed you how to do that in another video with my Random Dungeon series, and I want to keep this one simple for some of the beginning toy box builders who've been messaging me with questions, like the Z-Mill Farmer who's working on this, or some of the others. Okay, so I think I've got all the locators hooked up. I don't think I'll hook that one up though. So now we'll come into the generator and we'll configure the wave. And this being one of the first battles in here, maybe, I don't want to use too many powerful enemies. So maybe just a few basic stormtroopers. I don't want to have all the strong enemies up front, and then you get to the vault and they're a pushover. So we're going to put them at random locations, no generation delay. This time generation effects doesn't hurt. Oh, and yeah, make sure we set the team. Otherwise, they're going to ignore the player and run for those stairs toward the vault so they can attack those canisters. So there we have an encounter along the way. So we're coming from our mission giver, and this battle doesn't have anything really to do with the mission. It's just something interesting to kind of break up the long monotony between there and our destination. So I'm going to go ahead and go offline, and I'm going to set up a few more of these exactly as I did here, probably in the palace, and then another one out here in this courtyard, and I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, I've got this area set up here with a dynamic trigger connected to that locator, and some other locators connected to an enemy wave generator. And in the palace, I've done the same thing. I've actually got a dynamic trigger connected to this locator and 2 wave generators. And this dynamic trigger is set to 100 as the distance, because it's 15 blocks from here to the door, which is 80 units, and then another 5 to the bottom of the stairs. So I've set it to 100, so when you start up the stairs, that'll trigger the enemy generation in here. And I've got these locators in this part of the room connected to that enemy generator, and I've got some locators back here connected to this enemy generator. And you'll notice I'm careful not to put any other locators up on top of the throne days up there, because I don't want the player pursuing an enemy up here and accidentally wandering into the area around this locator, which tells them where to go next, because I don't want them to miss that. And there's one more thing we need to do out here that I forgot to do last time. I want to show you that. So we come over to the dynamic trigger, and on new logic connection, when exited by player Annie, so when they leave this area, we should come over here and remove the enemies. We'll defeat the wave. And the reason for that is we don't want to leave a lot of enemies in here if the player is not even in this area. It's possible you could be flying through here as Thor really fast and just pass right through this area. And if you have too many enemies in your toy box, it creates lag. So we don't want enemies in areas where the player's not even at. One other thing I want to discuss really quick. This topic came up on a YouTube discussion with MIDI287, and that is the use of a dynamic trigger versus a trigger area to trigger events. And just wanted to point out that the trigger area that I'm using back here, trigger areas tend to be better from a processing standpoint, because it's just a simple bounds check is the location within this box. And that's some very simple mathematics to check that, versus a dynamic trigger like this, where you're checking a radius around this point, and that requires a lot of trigonomic functions and things that really slow down the CPU. And so typically it's better to use a trigger area when you can. And here is a perfect example of when to use the trigger area because there's only one way in or out of that vault, so the player has to pass through here. Whereas when you're talking in an area like this that's more out in the open, you can't really control where the player goes. I could set up a trigger area on this bridge and in the doorway to the palace because those are really the only two ways a ground-based character can get in here. But if I'm using a flying character like Thor, I could cross that trigger area and never enter it. And even if I extend the trigger area out this way and up higher, there's no guarantee that a flying character will pass through it. I can enclose this whole area here in one big trigger area, and that would work, entering and exiting it. But it makes selecting things inside this trigger area a lot more difficult. So there's a lot of trade-offs there to that. So I just wanted to cover that, some of the benefits and uses of a trigger area versus a dynamic trigger or a distance checker. You'll notice I'm not using any distance checkers here. Those are even more costly to set up because you have to have one for each player. You're checking the player's location against a locator, and so that's not really very efficient either. So it's just a matter of what you're using. If you use too many dynamic triggers, you're going to bog down the CPU. We're not going to run into that case here because I've only got a handful, so we're okay. So anyway, with that said, let's go ahead and run through this and try it out. So we're going to come out here, back to our starting platform. And, oh, very important, before we do anything, we should come in here and save our game. I don't have a level starter. I don't have a reset button, so no way to reliably put this back in the state that it was at this point. So it's a good idea to save our game before we go through and play this adventure. Okay, so here we go. Let's try out our simple little mission. So Thor enters Asgard, and whoa, what is that weird ship that's up there? I've never seen anything like that. Where is everybody? What's going on? Oh, hey, here's Sif over in the shadows. Let's go see what she has to say.
A warrior maiden of Asgard is a most welcome addition.
Thor, would not your time be better served protecting Asgard?
That's her way of saying, I need your help. So we'll say continue. And now you'll note the radar marker has gone off of her, and we have a new one on our little radar screen in the lower left corner. So we'll head down that way. That looks pretty cool, having that Star Destroyer hang up there. And it tells the player right away that we're dealing with a world where Asgard and Star Wars coexist. So now the enemies are spawning, and whoa, who are these guys? I've never seen anything like them. How dare you attack my world? I think you got him, Thor.
Again!
That's funny. I dazed him, I think. These guys are making sounds I've never heard before. I've never fought stormtroopers as Thor before. That's pretty cool. I like that. Okay. Now we enter the next little courtyard here. And oh, we got some more enemies here. You've faced lightsabers and laser guns, but you've never faced anything like Mjolnir. You're not used to lightning, unless you cross the Emperor. Be thankful I didn't unleash the Hulk on you. See, there should be one more. There he is.
Move around.
Okay, let's see what we got waiting for us up in the palace as we head closer to that waypoint. Oh, more stormtroopers.
Here we go. Watch out! Watch out! Oh. Flee, you coward! Here we go. Flank them. Move around. You're not for the Empire. You're a guest.
See, I thought there was a guy up here. I guess not.
Watch out! Watch out!
Oh, they went up on the roof. That's the danger of having a closed area like this.
Do not despair. Your loss was foretold. Thankfully, I got this helmet. Here we go.
Load up and fall in.
Okay, the last guys are up here on the roof. Sometimes when you have covered areas like this, in multiple levels, the game gets confused and enemies can get stuck on the wrong level. Not really any way to fix that, except to try to avoid having areas where there's multiple levels. But in this case, since I'm trying to recreate the palace, there really wasn't any other choice. Okay, so that's it for that, and there's our radar marker. So now we'll come up here, and now that goes away, and down the stairs we go. That should kick off the enemy generation. And it did. Here we go.
Watch out! Watch out!
Whoa, that guy's got a rocket launcher. Nice.
To battle.
Get out of my treasure vault.
Flank them. Move
Oh,
around.
he's not, Sometimes when you get too many enemies,
K421.
you get one that's invincible here.
Sorry you did that.
But that'll change as soon as we destroy the rest of these enemies, usually. There we go. Hey, mission accomplished. Nice. We kept the Empire from capturing Odin's treasures. Well, that was a lot of fun. And it wasn't too bad a mission to set up. We had a simple mission giver, and we could make use of the little bit of text that we had. Between that and the radar markers, we were able to get the player over here. And so we were able to set up a simple mission and tell a little bit of a story. We saw the Empire Star Destroyer as we entered the toy box, which told us who we were fighting. So we weren't surprised when we saw the stormtroopers running around as a player, and kind of told a natural progression in the story that made a lot of sense, I think, without using too many words. So I think that was a success. Next time, we're going to set up another type of mission, and this time we're going to set up something where the text displayer is not going to be able to help us at all. And so we're going to be doing strictly visual storytelling next time. How do we get the player to go on a mission where we have no text whatsoever that we can use to direct them where they need to go or what they need to do. So we'll use some of the other Creativa toys to do that next time. So for now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel or sign up on my blog to see what we do next time. You can find build tips and logic diagrams on my blog as well for the different challenges that we make. And for now, Thor and I are signing off from Asgard, and we'll see you next time.